The responsibility of a prominent television personality, particularly one as well known as Huw Edwards, extends far beyond their on-screen duties. And as a public figure, their actions, their behaviour has a direct impact on the reputation and the integrity of the organisation that they represent, in this case the BBC. When such a figure becomes embroiled in legal or ethical controversies, the consequences are severe, not only for their own career, but also for the credibility of the institution that they are associated with and that they led. And Huw Edwards was protected by that institution for so long, and now the institution has to clear up the mess. The BBC should be, and is in many ways, one of the most respected broadcasting institutions globally, known for its commitment to impartiality and journalistic integrity. However, this reputation is fragile, and it can be easily damaged by the actions of individuals within the company, and the public places a great deal of trust in those figures, particularly those that they see on screen. And when these figures are implicated in misconduct of the severity that hangs over Huw Edwards, it can lead to a significant loss of confidence in the broadcaster as a whole. And Huw Edwards is just one of many who have brought the BBC into disrepute. But in the case of Huw Edwards, this veteran BBC presenter, his guilty plea in court for undisclosed charges has brought about substantial repercussions to both himself and the BBC. As a response to the damage caused, he has reportedly forfeited his pay rise, and some of his salary is agreed to pay back £200,000 to the BBC. And this financial restitution underscores the gravity of the situation, the recognition of the harm caused by his actions. But it is extraordinary that it was only after an outcry from the public that he took this decision. This should have been part of his move to the court. Guilty plea, here's the money. It all goes as one package, but it hasn't, because it seems that with someone like Huw Edwards, the thing has to be dragged out of him. The £200,000 repayment by Edwards, it's a gesture towards the significant costs involved in addressing the fallout from the scandal. The BBC will likely face both immediate and long-term challenges as it works to restore its reputation, and the costs associated with legal fees, public relations efforts, the potential loss of viewership, advertising revenue, all contribute to the financial burden on the organisation. And of course, and I disapprove intensely of this, the censorship of anything on the BBC, on the iPlayer, that is associated with Huw Edwards. That requires a lot of work to remove all that stuff. The Doctor Who programmes, the announcements that Huw Edwards has made over the time. The public perception of the BBC as a trustworthy source of information is compromised by Huw Edwards, and it's going to lead to a prolonged period of reputational repair. The BBC hasn't really commented on the return of this money, hasn't really commented on the story. It says, of course, the BBC must uphold the highest standards of integrity, and when those standards are breached, decisive action is required to maintain public trust. That reflects the broader sentiment that the institution must prioritise its reputation and take strong measures to address any harm caused by its representatives and their stupidity. Edwards' decision to return some of this money may be seen as a reasonable and necessary step, but it also raises questions about the broader culture within the BBC and why they paid him for so long after he had quit. Critics may argue that such incidents reflect deeper issues within the organisation, such as the pressures and the lack of oversight that can lead to the elevation of people like Huw Edwards. There's also a debate to be had about whether financial restitution alone is sufficient to address the harm caused to the BBC. Nothing to do with the legal issues. The legal issues are independent. But systemic change is required to prevent further damage to this monolithic institution. The case of Huw Edwards serves as a stark reminder of the heavy responsibility borne by public figures and the potential consequences of their actions, and the BBC's handling of the situation is now going to be watched very closely as it seeks to restore its reputation, to maintain the trust of its audience, and what it does with similar figures in the future, irrespective of their involvement in criminal or whatever activity. Can the BBC afford to have one individual front its reputation like this? That fundamentally is the problem, and possibly the failing of the BBC in recent years, that it's got these figures that it is elevated to a position that is beyond reason. The BBC is not Huw Edwards. Huw Edwards was not the BBC. And this incident highlights the need for vigilance, for accountability within media organisations, to make sure that individuals don't undermine the integrity of the institution as a whole. But it also means institutions need to find a way to identify themselves and personalise themselves without being dependent on individuals who can prove to have feet of clay.